Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad you joined us today. My name is Sridhar Ramanathan, co-founder of Aventi Group. We are a product marketing agency, business to business only. Primarily, it's all we do is B2B technology marketing, product marketing, based in San Francisco. I have the great pleasure of having Andrew Lochart on the call here with us, and he'll be the primary speaker on today's discussion. I want to give you a quick intro of Andrew. He and I have known each other a number of years, more than 2 decades, believe it or not. So we have lots of fun stories to tell about each other, right, Andrew? Which will be secret. But Andrew, he will never say this himself, but he's so humble, but he's a 25-year veteran of B2B technology marketing, primarily product marketing, but he has run overall marketing for a number of years. Right now, he's serving as an advisor on 2 mobile startups. Mobile is very hot and has been for the last several years. So he's an advisor for those. He also helps with business plans and achieve product market fit. Most recently, he was with Unisys. He headed up product marketing for a $200 million security business unit in the area of micro-segmentation, a variety of products, zero trust, some very hot, high-growth security product areas. He also led some startup marketing teams at Postini. Postini was acquired by Google, you may all know, and this is prior to the Google acquisition. Andrew had a lot to do with the valuation of the company because of his marketing expertise. He was at Active Reasoning, Wink Communications. He has an MBA from my favorite university on earth, University of California, Berkeley. Congratulations, Andrew. And he has an undergrad from an even more prestigious university, Princeton, where Einstein went. So, Andrew, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sridhar. It's awfully kind of you to say all those nice things about me. It's been a checkered career, but I've had the privilege of working at a number of really interesting companies. And work with some really great people who have taught me a lot. And that's one of the things I've learned throughout my career is the topic for today.
Yeah, well, let's get right into the topic for today here, Andrew. You had actually quite a bit of passion on this area of analyst relations, and all product marketers to varying degrees work with the AR team. Sometimes it's more heavy product management. Sometimes product marketing has an even bigger role. And I'd love for you to just start off. We have the title of the talk, The 7 Ups of Building Credibility Through Analyst Relations. The ups refers to Andrew's metaphor. You're going to see that momentarily as 7 specific tips. Each of them is an up. So let's just start with the first up here, Andrew. Let's roll right into it.
Yeah, let's go to the next slide. So the whole point of this topic is I want marketers, all of us in marketing and product marketing, to face up to the fact that we create a lot of content almost reflexively, right? We say, oh, we need another white paper or an infographic or blog. And that's necessary and it's good. But it's also your company saying nice things about itself. So hopefully you're putting out good information there, you're generating awareness. But what you're not going to generate is credibility, right? Credibility can't come from you saying nice things about yourself, right? You need to get others to do that for you. And I've seen this time and again, and this is one of the things that my team and I worked on most recently at Unisys, is the reflex to say, well, we've got a new campaign, so let's write another piece of collateral. And what I want people to do is face up to the fact that that may not be the right kind of content, or your mix may need to be rebalanced to include perspectives from third parties saying nice things about your company. And I think broadly speaking, there's 2 types. There's your customers, right? Get your customers activated, write case studies about them, shoot the talking head videos where they're giving testimonials. That will build credibility for your company. And then the second area, broadly speaking, are the industry analysts. Get them to recognize your company, your solution, where you exist in your product category, your position, and eventually, go from no coverage to neutral coverage to favorable coverage. That's what I want to talk about today, is how do you get those industry analysts engaged and becoming part of your plan for building credibility.
That's great, Andrew. So with regards to how much time should a product marketer, a B2B PMM, devote throughout the year in order to build that kind of credibility coming from the analyst community, as opposed to the once-a-year fire drill that you might be doing with Gartner MQs as an example, Magic Quadrant? Do you have some guidelines on how should we think about that?
Well, so as you said, prior to Unisys, I spent a number of years at startups. Very often I was the marketing department myself. So there's a ramp, and there's only so many hours in the week, so you have to prioritize. But what I urge product marketers to do is think first about reaching out to the industry analysts. And the step before that is understanding your buyers, right? God help a product marketer who doesn't understand the buyers that he's trying to, or that he or she is trying to communicate with. And we talk a lot about buyer personas and how we're going to slice and dice the decision makers and the buyers and writing content for them. And I think very often overlooked is understanding who the influencers are. Who do your buyers turn to for neutral, objective coverage, right? Those are the analysts that you then are going to care about. To answer your question, yeah, if you're just doing analyst relations as a once-a-year event because it's time for a wave or a magic quadrant type of report, you're doing it wrong. I'd like to see product marketers have a tempo where on at least a monthly basis, they have some sort of briefing or analyst day or some sort of inquiry call with at least one industry analyst. More frequently than that, if you're in a product category that's got a lot of coverage, or if you've got the bandwidth to devote more time. So, it should probably be, I don't know, several hours a week, dozens of hours a month spent on that time that you're probably going to have to take away from the other things that you may be in the habit of doing, like writing another blog post or shepherding another infographic through the graphics team. But that's kind of where I want people to have their heads at, is really thinking about those analysts, because that credibility is invaluable.
Makes sense. Perfect. Thanks, Andrew. Okay, we can go to the next tip here.
So the next thing is marketers need to really brush up on who are the analysts that matter. So we just talked about that. You got to go to your buyers and understand who influences their purchasing decisions. But also you need to understand what does an analyst do for a living, and the content that they create, all these research reports. I've worked with a lot of startup CEOs and CMOs who frankly didn't have a good grasp of what analysts do. Everybody knows about the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and sometimes they know very, very little beyond that. They don't understand that there's other analyst firms other than Gartner. There's reports that are coming out on almost a monthly basis about certain product categories that aren't structured like a Magic Quadrant or Forrester Wave. The other thing is I'll show this sample of a Magic Quadrant to people, and I'll ask people, can somebody point out to me the fail quadrant here? And there is no fail quadrant. Being in any one of these four boxes is a good thing. It's an accomplishment. But again, I've worked with startup founders / CEOs who think that there's 3 fail quadrants in this image, right? That if you're not in the leader box, you failed, the wheels are going to come off, and you go pick a fight with the analyst. And that just means that you haven't brushed up. You don't understand what that report says. I challenge everybody on this call and all product marketers to be honest with themselves. Have you ever sat down and read one of these lengthier reports cover to cover? Because I know what everybody does. If there's a Magic Quadrant that comes out for your product category, what do we all do? We all flip to page 3 and find the quadrant and look for our dot. And then maybe you flip to page 7 and read the 2 paragraphs about your company. That's not enough. That means you still don't have an understanding of what the analysts are doing for a living. And it means you can never be a good partner to that analyst. You can never really communicate powerfully and relevantly with that analyst if you don't know what they do for a living.
Such a great point here, Andrew. And I just want to share a little anecdote with regards to why it's so important to brush up or read what the analyst has been writing. I had a situation just last year with one of our clients, and they spent a lot of time preparing for this presentation, and they delivered it. And just a few minutes into the talk, the analyst says, we think your category is dead or dying because your biggest competitor is a cloud vendor, and they're just eating your lunch. And we actually think you guys are going to sort of die away. And it was a complete shock to the client. They did not realize that point of view because they hadn't done their homework prior to the briefing. So they were very ill prepared to deal with that objection. It was actually a test of mettle of our clients' positioning and where they are in the marketplace. So to your admonition here, Andrew, brush up is you got to do it. You have to read their point of view, understand it, and be prepared to speak their language.
Exactly,
Totally
right.
agree.
Yeah, and again, figure out that analyst, is that somebody who actually influences your buyer's purchasing decisions? If they don't, then maybe you don't worry about their POV all that much. But if they are a key player in that product category, yeah, don't go in cold. Understand what their perspective is. You're so right, Sridhar.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, number 3.
So the third thing product marketing needs to do is team up. And I mean team up with the AR manager at your company. Now, I've been at a lot of very small startups where there was nobody for me to team up with, so I've had to do it myself. And fortunately, I've been privileged in my career to work with 2 of the all-time great pros at Analyst Relations. Many years ago when I was at Postini, I worked with a guy named Marty Tactile, and he was our PR and AR guy. And I learned so much from him. And I learned how strategic Analyst Relations was. And I saw what his job was to set a strategy for our press and analyst coverage based on the company strategy. The running joke was that something would be going on inside of Postini, and one of the executives would say, "We need to put out a press release." And Marty's response was invariably, "Why?" Right? Don't just throw press releases out for the sake of it. And it was the same with the Analyst Relations, right? He opened my eyes to find the ones who matter, find the ones who influence the buyers, and then engage with them early and often and repeatedly. And then most recently, you mentioned that I was at Unisys most recently. I had the privilege again of working with somebody unbelievably great at her job, a woman named Brenda Celeste. Same thing. She understands that analyst relations is a strategic role. She was setting the agenda. She made sure that when she pulled me into a call, it was with somebody who was going to be influential to our buyers. So if you're at a real small startup, maybe you're going to wear all these hats. But if you're at a company that's gotten big enough and you're sitting over in the corner with the rest of product marketing, please, for God's sake, go find the analyst relations manager and make sure that you two become best friends, because it's an incredibly powerful combination when you're working together, each of you practicing your profession. But the synergy there is amazing when you do it right.
Andrew, with regards to that synergy, how should an analyst relations leader working with product marketing really define that persona? Because that should be one of the audiences that the product marketer is concerned with, in addition to sales, the sales organization, the customer buyers. Then you have the analyst community. How do you recommend best working with the AR team with regards to really getting clear on the personas?
Yeah, so I think that, if you're a product marketer and you haven't really been exposed too much to doing analyst relations, a really good AR manager will help you understand how analysts are a different audience, and how a lot of your muscle memory of, I'm going to sit down and write a blog, or I'm going to sit down and write a white paper or a presentation, you need to leave that at the door when you're creating communications for analysts, right? The things that you're ingrained to do when you're pitching a sales prospect, the kinds of things you're going to say about your company, a lot of that you really can't do with analysts. And so if you're new to this, listen and learn from your analyst relations manager, because they'll tell you, hey, there's too much hype in this thing, right? They'll tell you, this deck you've put together reads like a sales deck, and that's not what's going to happen when we get on the phone with an analyst. It needs to be a completely different kind of conversation.
Very true, Andrew. In many ways, an analyst is sort of like a journalist. They're investigative. They cut through the hype and get to the facts and the evidence and supporting justification of any position you might have. So really great tips.
Exactly. And trying to spin them or sell them or pitch them, it doesn't work. And in fact, it just backfires, right? You're insulting their intelligence and their integrity if you just, even innocently, you just didn't know better. You approach them with marketing content. You can't do that. And again, if you're new to this as a product marketer, listen and learn from your AR partner.
Right on.
Move on to the next step. So measure up is the next thing. And this is going to sound obvious to most marketers, but it's easy to think of analyst relations as a lot of meetings and phone calls and briefings and a lot of talking. And it is that. And it really is about building your relationship. And we'll talk more about that later. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't have metrics. And you can start small. And you don't have to get really, really sophisticated initially. Again, my perspective does very much come from all the years I've spent at startup companies where just you got to do something and then build on it. And it can be as simple as every month, look ahead. How many analyst briefings have you set up for next month and the month after? And then keep track of those. And you just want that number to always be going up, right? Okay, last month we had one call with one analyst at Forrester, but next month we've got calls set up with two analysts, right? We're expanding our reach. We're learning who the influencers are. We've got momentum. That's a leading indicator. Hey, I've got a bunch of analyst calls set up for next month. That's great. Lagging indicators that you want to pay attention to are things like, are you being mentioned in the analyst coverage? Are you showing up in the relevant research? And if you're not, why not? And you want to build on that. So now you can get a lot more sophisticated. I don't know if anybody on the call is familiar with a company called Spotlight, but they help companies with their analyst relations. And they even have a SaaS platform that analyst relations managers can use to track things. And they've got, I don't know, 24 metrics that they'll track or train you to track for your analyst relations. Very sophisticated, a little bit complicated though. And you don't have to go crazy. I've always just done this with a spreadsheet. If I'm tracking it myself, or if I'm lucky enough to work with an AR professional like Marty and Brenda that I was talking about, they're going to keep track of it for me, right? That's part of their job. But as the product marketer, you should know the answer to these questions, right? How many research reports were you mentioned in last quarter? And was that coverage, negative, neutral, or favorable? And build on that. So just like anything else in marketing, any other campaign, there's going to be metrics. Just make sure you've got them for your analyst relations program. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And have a baseline maybe at the beginning and then watch it trend up throughout the year.
Yeah, and I've been at startups where the baseline was zero, right? No analyst engagement at all. And so it's easy to move things up and to the right, but keep track of it. Be able to, show your CEO a chart. Because one of the things that I've encountered is a certain amount of resistance to investing in analyst relations. And it's like anything else that you want to spend money on, whether you're at a big company or a startup, is justify spending that money or the time, right? Analyst relations doesn't have to be about writing checks and having subscriptions and, all that kind of stuff. It's investing your time, and your CEO or CMO is likely going to say, please justify that, right? So having some metrics and being able to show progress is hugely important.
Mm-hmm. And Andrew, just to tie back to your very opening slide, which is credibility comes from the analysts much more than, the vendor, us bragging about the product and service. And with regards to measuring, I am curious, what do you think of some of these customer forums where sometimes analysts are monitoring, such as G2 forum or Gartner's Peer Insight? I mean, there are other forums where vendors are listening to customers talk among themselves and analysts are paying attention. Where would something like that fit at all as a KPI, analysts speaking up in those forums? Or maybe not.
And again, those forums are really interesting. So I think it's great that Gartner and the others recognize that that's an important thing for them to be involved in, having those kinds of peer reviews going on. So I think it was brilliant that Gartner decided to set that up. Yeah, sure, you can track if analysts are participating in those communities and chiming in. This is the intersection also of what we talked about at the very beginning, is your credibility comes from your customers testifying on your behalf, as well as from analysts talking about you. And so as part of your customer reference program, you might encourage them to go jump into one of those forums like G2 or Gartner and say, and advocate on your behalf. And one of the dynamics there is, depending on the product category that you're in, that may be the most influential set of influencers for your buyers. I was talking with a CMO, this is 6 months ago, at a company that does cloud network routing for multi-cloud environments. And when I was talking to him over coffee, he was talking about, we got onto this topic of analyst relations and influencers. And he said he was in the process of letting his subscriptions to the big analyst houses lapse. And I said, oh, really? Why are you doing that? And he said he figured out that his buyers were not CXOs. They were, more kind of hands-on practitioners of network management. And all they cared about were the reviews that other buyers were leaving behind on the AWS store or marketplace where you could buy his software. It was right there. So it was like the Yelp model or the Amazon model of customers leaving behind reviews. And it turned out that's all that future buyers really checked in on. They didn't care what Forrester or Gartner or IDC had to say about it.
Exactly.
So again, listen to your buyers and see what influences them. So I think that your point about Gartner and G2, I think they're recognizing that, at least for certain product categories, that's where these decisions are being influenced. And so I think it makes sense that they got into that.
Okay, great. Ready for number 5?
Yeah, let's go. So I really want marketers to beef up the content of the presentations they're going to prepare for their analyst briefings. And I think the best analyst meetings, you don't even need slides. It should be a conversation. But I know that I'm not going to be able to stop any of you from creating a presentation before you go to a meeting. So make it a good one, make it a great one. And we touched on this earlier. It can't just be the same presentation that you give to your sales organization to go pitch sales prospects. It's got to be from scratch, aimed entirely at this audience of analysts. I mean, I think about the reflex that I think so many of us have when we sit down to write a piece of marketing content. We'll start with some sort of problem statement, right? Which is, the digital transformation of businesses has increased the attack surface of the company, right? That's the first sentence. I've written that sentence in the last few years for white papers. You don't start there with an analyst. They already know that. They know much more about what's happening than you do. So the kind of reflexive content that you want to write down, you got to just get rid of it. You also better bring a lot of proof points. So if you're going to go into that analyst and have a slide saying that your widget is the best, the fastest, the cheapest, the easiest, why is the analyst going to believe what you're saying about your credibility problem? If you're there talking about your company to the analyst, you want that analyst to go, okay, I believe you. I'm buying into what you're saying. And those proof points might include some of your customers. It might include other hard data that you've been able to collect internally based on whatever your product or your solution does. But you got to beef up that presentation. You can't just show up with more of the same old marketing materials.
Just to lend a little anecdote to your point there, Andrew, on proof points or evidence. We have a lot of cybersecurity clients. You are among them, of course, at Unisys Security. And I've been on many, many analyst briefings. One of the things I see resonates so well is when a security company, as an example, shares some internal data, some research they have, for example, on the time it takes to detect a threat, the time it takes to remediate a threat. Some of these metrics are analysts do value coming from the vendor if the vendor has unique visibility of some of these parameters that the industry at large may not have. So some unique research. As an example, Symantec every year puts out something called the Internet Security Threat Report, ISTR, and analysts really look at that report. And there are many others. Malwarebytes has one, many other companies. And so on the beef up comment you're making here, I think what I totally underscore is having proof points, evidence, data that may not be readily available because the analysts will grab onto that. They can actually quote that, cite that, and that lends credibility to the whole topic that you're discussing. So.
Absolutely. So we played that game when I was at Postini, which is back in the early and mid 2000s, before the phrases cloud and SaaS were used. But that's what we had built. We had built an anti-spam company in the cloud. It was a very strange way of doing things at the time. When I joined the company in 2003, there were 3 companies doing anti-spam as a service and about 90 doing it as either an appliance or software that you installed on premises. And it was an approach that was very controversial and not popular with most buyers. I think at least 80% of the market were not willing to consider that approach. It just seemed weird and risky to them back in the day. And eventually, so we had to use analyst relations to kind of win over the analysts and get them to say, no, that's a really, really good idea. One of the things we could do is go to an analyst and say, well, we know a lot about what's going on with email because we process billions of emails every day on behalf of all of our customers. We had this aggregate body of data that our competitors didn't have, or if they had it, they had to admit that their appliances were phoning home and sending data back, and customers didn't necessarily want to hear that kind of story. So we were able to put out statistics based on this enormous corpus of data that we had. Mm-hmm. And we could get journalists and analysts to look at that and say, okay, that's really interesting, and help them see the power of this cloud-based approach in our ability to analyze the data of what was happening with spam and viruses across this massive amount of data, not just to impress people and say, here's a bunch of statistics, but because it let us fine-tune our spam filters better than anybody else, because we were just looking at more spam and we had the nice feedback loop going. So yeah, whatever it is that's relevant to what your offering does for your customer that might be unique, if you can take that data and use that as proof that your product really is better or serves a marketplace best compared with competition, absolutely take advantage of that.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Great, Andrew.
All right, let's move on. So we were starting to talk about this earlier, Sridhar, about how many hours per month should people devote. And I'll reiterate it, but I don't want to bore people. But if you think analyst relations is once a year filling out the survey for a Forrester Wave or Gartner Magic Quadrant, you're not doing analyst relations. Analyst relations is about showing up over and over and over. I developed a rule of thumb in my career that it wasn't until the fourth meeting with a specific analyst that they could repeat back to me what my company did and what our differentiator was. Because they're processing so much data, right? If you're an analyst in a really big product category, you're probably talking to 50 vendors, and then you're talking to hundreds, if not thousands, of buyers who are making inquiry calls. They've got a lot to keep track of. So it's to my benefit if I meet with that analyst every couple of months. And the first few times, it's going to be blank slate all over again. I have to remind them, this is who we are, this is what we do, here's who we do it for, here's why we're better and different. And that's never going to sink in if you're not willing to spend the time and energy to take those calls. My advice, and I've worked with founder CEOs who they're not interested in being the face of the company and happy to have me handle all the press analyst briefings. And I've had to explain to them, if Marty or Brenda come to me and say, hey, Andrew, I need you on a call tomorrow, my answer is always yes. And afterwards I'll ask, who's the analyst? But if that AR partner of mine is asking me, the answer is yes, because there's no higher leverage way for me to spend my time. And something else that I was going to do in that hour tomorrow is not going to happen, because this is the highest priority. You've got to show up, and that it's the only way that you build the relationship, right? Is by showing up repeatedly, and you brushed up so you understand who the analyst is, what their research area is, what their point of view is. And you're taking the time to develop that relationship. And yeah, you're doing it because you want them to remember who you are and why you're better and all that kind of stuff. And there's a transactional component to it. I want them to put my dot up and to the right someday in a report like that. But the way you get there is by understanding that they're people just like us, and their job is really hard. And if I keep showing up and telling them my story clearly and concisely, that makes their job easier. So show up. And Marty and I, in the 3 years we did this together at Postini, we did 1,000 press and analyst meetings over a 3-year span. Wow. Because we locked in on, this is the highest and best use of our time. Because it's this really crowded product category, we've got this cloud model that not only confuses people, but scares people. So we need credibility. We better get the analysts on our side. We better get journalists to think that we're an interesting company to cover. And so we prioritize that. People on this call today may not be working at companies that are in quite such an extreme position of really needing to battle negative perceptions. But I'm pretty sure that no matter what your company does or what your standing is in your marketplace, you're going to benefit from positive coverage by the influencers. And that just takes energy and effort and time.
Yeah, speaking of that energy, effort, and time, so if you're fortunate enough to have a Brenda or a Marty or analyst relations leader in your company, very likely they are coming to you, the product marketer, hey, I'd like you to do a briefing. How often should the product marketer proactively go to their AR lead and say, hey, I've got something I want to communicate, I want to test, I want to validate with analysts? So showing up is a little bit reactive. What about how often should you proactively go to your AR person?
Yeah, I
know
love
we'll get
that
to that
question.
in a little bit.
I love that question. And I hesitate to give you a hard number on it. But the philosophy that you just brought up of product marketing should be finding ways to take the initiative. You are so right about that. And I can't quantify it for you, but anytime I sit down and read a research report that seems to be about my product category, but I don't recognize the name of the analyst whose name is on it, first thing I do is I'm going to go to my analyst relations manager and say, hey, who's this? Are they new at the company? Did they just slide over? You know, do we know this person? Because I don't think I've ever spoken to them. Or maybe I'm reading an article in the press and they quote an analyst who seems to be talking about what our company does. And so, you know, whatever it is, if I'm consuming content and I think I've happened upon somebody who seems to have an opinion about my product category and I don't know who they are, I'm absolutely going to go to my AR partner. The other proactive thing, and I think this is easy for product marketing, is because product marketing is involved in go-to-market strategy and product launches, is naturally, if I've got a launch coming up in a month or two or whatever the lead time is, I want to go work with both the PR and AR people and make sure that we're going to go talk to the right people right before or right after that launch announcement. So I'm driving that launch because I'm in product marketing. A natural part of coordinating that launch would be for me to go to AR and say, oh, by the way, you know, here's the new offering, here's what it does new and differently. And if I think that this takes us into a new product category, then, hey, let's work with AR to find who's the new analyst who should be briefed on this because we just moved into an adjacent space. Or it might just be more of the same, but let's make sure that we get our existing set of analysts briefed on it. And one of the things that analyst relations managers who are really good at their job have always done for me in my career is to remind me, we can go ask those analysts, what do you think of this new feature that we're building? You know, does this move the needle for your buy-side clients? What do you think of this messaging that we're developing? I want to promote this new feature with this messaging. You can take that to analysts and get really good feedback about, hey, yeah, that will make total sense to the buyers that I, the analyst, talk to, or no, that's going to be really confusing. Why don't you say this? And product marketers ideally should be proactive about that. Hey, AR, let's go talk to an analyst and run this past them. But you know what? Sometimes I forget to do that because the heat of battle, getting ready for a launch. And my partners in analyst relations, they'll save me and say, Andrew, this is great, but let's run it past Joe Analyst first and get their feedback.
Excellent guidance. Excellent, excellent. Actually, it's a very nice segue to your last one. And folks on the call today, I definitely encourage you to use the chat window to queue up some questions you may have. We're going to turn it over to you all in just a moment here.
Yes, so the seventh up is shut up. And this is really hard for us as human beings. It's really hard for us as marketers because we're so excited. We're talking to the analyst, presumably because we've got a new offering coming up. And we want to talk about it. And we know how cool the new feature is or the new product is. And we want to go in there and talk about it. And you're going to do that. And again, if you can have a conversation without ever opening up your laptop, that's a win, I think, because now you're just having a real human interaction. But, the analyst may say, hey, show me the slides. I need a diagram, whatever it is. But if all you do in that analyst interaction is do all the talking, you've really blown it. Because yes, you know more about your offering or this new offering that you're launching, whatever it is, than the analyst does. And you want to educate them. You genuinely want to convey, this is new, this is revolutionary. We want to make sure you understand it, dear analyst. But that's the only thing that you know more about. That analyst knows more about the marketplace as a whole. They know more about the buyers than you do because they talk to so many every day, all those inquiry calls that they get. They know more about your competition. And if you have a genuine dialogue with analysts every single time, you're going to learn so much from them. So I don't care what the occasion is, shut up and listen and get them talking and learn from them. And oh, by the way, it's not just, again, transactional. I'm going to learn something that I didn't know and I can run back and implement that knowledge. Yeah, it's that. But that's how you build a relationship. And I want to keep bringing this back to, it's called Analyst Relations for a reason, right? It's genuinely building a relationship. And I'll give you an example. So yesterday, as a matter of fact, a very significant research report was published by one of the big analyst firms. And it's their big annual thing, and there's dots on a grid. And it's sort of the last major AR project I worked on when I was at Unisys. And I think Unisys did quite well, considering that just a year prior, Unisys wasn't even covered by this same report a year prior. Unisys was not on anybody's radar. And that's because even before I started at Unisys, Brenda and a couple of people in product marketing started to build the strategy around putting Unisys on the map for security solutions. It was kind of a new initiative at Unisys, really pulling together a disparate set of offerings, building out additional offerings, having a coherent story around it. That started less than 3 years ago. I joined Unisys 2 years ago, partnered with Brenda, and we kept showing up and we kept shutting up and learning from the analysts. Our messaging got so much better over those 2 years because of the commentary we got back from the analysts that mattered to our buyers. And we built a relationship so that when it was time for this analyst firm to put out the questionnaire and survey for this big annual report, they included us. They took the time to include us because, it's so much work for the analysts to invite a vendor to participate. And, as vendors, we look at it and go, oh my God, there's 350 questions here. I got to answer. This is going to kill me. And I've got to prepare 2 hours worth of demos. But multiply that by 50, because that's what that analyst is dealing with, right? He's dealing with you and 50 other vendors. It's a massive undertaking. And they could very easily just say, no, we're not inviting Unisys because it's not worth the effort. They invited Unisys to participate because we had built a relationship. Yes, we had really cool products. We had established some credibility. We had some customer references, all that good stuff, blocking and tackling. But we took the time over the last year or two to build that relationship. So there's no quick wins in AR, or very rarely. I've had 1 or 2 pretty quick wins. It's a long game you're playing. But if you do it, really good things happen as a result.
Andrew, let me just, since we're on this very topic of briefing analysts and asking questions of them and listen, we have a question from our audience here, Eric Rasmussen. What if you don't have a relationship with an analyst, or you don't buy the firm's research or pay for the license or seat? In that situation where there really is not a prior relationship, do you have suggestions for doing things that getting new product or messaging feedback? How do we do that when you don't have that kind of relationship? And how important is it to pay for play?
So my knowledge of all the analyst firms and all the rules of interaction is far from encyclopedic. I would say that when I've been at startup companies and did not have any kind of paid relationship with an analyst firm, analysts absolutely wanted to take calls periodically, once or twice a year, to hear what my startup was doing, because they need to know, right? Oh, there's a new startup. What are you doing? Is it interesting? Does it fit within my research? Going to them though and asking, hey, can you give me feedback? That was typically not something I could do unless I had that paid relationship with an analyst. So if the question is, how do you get analysts to give you feedback? It probably is challenging to do that, admittedly. But again, even without being a subscriber to their research, you can usually get at least one meeting a year, and they may structure it very rigidly as it's a one-way transmit. They just want you, the vendor, to tell them, what have you built, why'd you build it, and all that stuff. And I know that with some analyst firms, they're pretty rigid about, they're not going to talk back at you, unfortunately. I think others, it's a little bit more flexible, and you might get some interesting feedback on the product or your target market or the messaging. But I think, it's probably challenging. But I've worked at these startups where I was the marketing team. I didn't have a big budget, but and at first you say, oh geez, I'm gonna have to spend $30,000 or $50,000 to get a subscription to one of the big analyst firms. I think that's cheap money for the impact it can ultimately have on your startup. That's $50,000 I would much rather spend if it got me access to the right analysts at the right analyst firm, rather than spend it on content syndication or Google AdWords or something. I think that the impact, medium to long term in a company, is much greater. So my particular bias is write the check. If you've got to write the check, but again, don't do it just because, oh, it's Gartner and I have to be a Gartner client. You don't necessarily. Maybe you need to be a client of one of the other dozens of analyst firms. And that again starts with, do you really know who your buyer is?
Yeah, Andrew, and I would add to the pay to play question, comment is, there's more to analyst relations than just a briefing, a meeting where you're sitting across the table with somebody. There's a lot of social media going on, and where analysts are speaking in various forums, and LinkedIn groups are very specific to a domain area technology. And without a quote relationship, you can listen and even comment on something an analyst said and get on their radar through social media. It's not a formal briefing. You're not paying them as a client, but you're beginning to get on their radar and build a virtual relationship, which is a stepping stone on the way to eventually getting a briefing with them. So I would encourage, we're in a social media very, I don't want to say transactional, but gone are the days where you have a once a year briefing with an analyst. I think we now need to think in terms of online engaging communities of people where you are a voice as much as just listening. So I would add that little component.
Your
thoughts
so
on
right.
social media there, Andrew? And we'll wrap with that and go into the next slide, which is summary. But any thoughts on social media and how does that play?
Yeah. So no, your point is absolutely spot on, and you need to figure out, are you doing it with your own personal persona on Twitter or LinkedIn, or are you doing it from your company's? I typically have done it from my company. I want the company I'm working for to have the relationship, but I might also do it from my own personal account if I think that should be part of the mix. But the thing you have to balance is your company's persona on these social media. You may also be using it to put out marketing messages, right, to potential buyers. And if the feed from your company is 95% marketing messages, hey, come see us at this event, and hey, download this white paper, it can be challenging if you want to go in and put out a more personal message. Hey, dear analyst, responding to your posting here and have a thought. It could get lost in the noise. But it is ultimately not you, the individual. It's not me, Andrew, that needs to have a good relationship with the analyst firm. It is the company I'm working for. I want that analyst firm to think about the company, because I may not be around forever, right? I might,
that's true,
move on somewhere else. And there has to be a legacy of the company having that relationship. But it's a tricky balancing act, because that relationship obviously was me and my AR partner on the conference calls, showing up in person. So I think there's a balancing act there.
There's a balance. And we'll close with this, move to your summary, which is, I think it's both, clearly both. It's not either or. You want your personal brand, personal relationship, personal LinkedIn profile to be involved as much as your company. Hopefully there's no conflict, you're just reinforcing the company brand, company social media messaging. But I would highly encourage people work on your personal brand. This is also going to come to bear when you're changing careers or changing companies. You want those relationships with analysts to continue beyond your current company. That's a very valuable thing. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, good
Absolutely.
comments there, Andrew. Well, just mindful of time here. Guys in the audience, please be thinking of questions. We've got some coming in here. Let me have you go ahead and summarize, if you don't mind, Andrew. You have a lot of fantastic wisdom, and we can summarize and we'll open it up for questions. And thanks, Rocky. I see your question. We'll come to that in just a moment.
Yeah, so when I present this talk, live setting, I'll usually ask for a show of hands. I'll go through these 7 ups and say, all right, who's going to go back to work tomorrow morning and do one of these? I'm not going to try to do that here online, but go do something. I hope that people, if they thought there was anything interesting or educational about this talk that we've just done, Sridhar, go act on it, and you can start with face up. Go step back and think about, what is your current content mix? And if it's 100% your company saying nice things about your company, I urge you to really think about, is that the right balance for you to establish credibility for your company? Maybe you're already doing it and you just need to, go work more closely with your AR manager. Go do that. Go get to know that person. If you're at a largish company, you may not sit in the same office or the same city, but you need to really mind meld and create that partnership. Go and do a postmortem on the last slide deck you prepared for an analyst meeting and be honest with yourself. Was there a lot of marketing hype in it, or was it just really frank technical conversation? So anybody could, on this call should pick any one thing at least and really say, I'm going to do that differently tomorrow.
Absolutely. Okay, do we cover all of them here? Let's turn to Rocky. She has a question from the audience that says, this question is related to the company's customers, okay, the end customers, Andrew.
Yeah.
It says that the references that a company submits for an analyst survey, so these are customer references, what value proposition should we give to the customers to participate in the analyst survey? So what's in it for the customer? Why should they participate in this analyst survey?
Yeah.
There's a part 2 question there. Thoughts?
So the first part of my answer may not be very satisfying, but if you've built a really great product or service or whatever it is, you don't have to motivate your customers, right? It's the ones who are the raving fans of what your company does. All you have to do is say, hey, there's a website here. Would you consider leaving a review? And if you've built great loyal customers, they'll go do it. And you don't have to have a value proposition. They want to sing your praises. Now I know that doesn't always happen, but if you're in a position where you're going to have to somehow bribe your customers to say nice things about you, there's a deeper problem that you've got. It means that your customers don't love your product. And I would, if you're having trouble, if you don't see your customers going on to the peer review websites, or if you're running a community, if they're not raving fans, I would go over to the product team and talk about that. Why aren't they raving fans? Why is it so hard for me in product marketing to get customers to say yes to a case study, or to say yes, they'll do a 90-second video? Why aren't they raving about us on Gartner Peer Insights? So that's kind of how I would look at it, is if I've got to be transactional and get customers or give them something, there's a problem that probably needs to be really investigated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to that I would add, if I may, Andrew, where I have seen success in terms of getting a customer reference or willingness to talk to an analyst goes back to being very personal. The win to the customer sometimes, that customer contact, is their own personal relationship. They have a win by getting to know this analyst, and vice versa, because they're going to be switching jobs. I go back to the job search, job hopping tendency. Some customers, and I won't mention that we have a client right now in the security space, we are getting a lot of customer reference willingness to speak with analysts. And why? It's because we personalize that request. Like, hey, would you director of security operations be willing to speak to this specific analyst? Why would you want to do that? Because you you might eventually move on from your current company, and this analyst relationship will help you as you continue your career, and vice versa. So the more you can connect personal to personal, the higher the odds are that you will actually get that audience. So yes, we're assuming the product is good. It's not a big liability,
Yep.
but there's always a win for the analyst, for the customer contact. Sometimes it's anonymized. They can't say the name of the company, but they are willing to share their name or their title. And so I find the more personal you can get with customer references, the better off you are.
I think that's exactly right, Sridhar.
Yeah. Part two to Rocky's question is, okay, once agreed, let's suppose the analyst, the customer is willing to speak with an analyst. How should the product marketer prepare that customer to give their best messaging to that analyst?
It's a great question. And so as the product marketer, presumably you have understood who the analyst is, what their point of view is. If this is a reference that's part of one of the big Magic Quadrant or WAVE type of reports, you've read the inclusion criteria, you've read all the questions, you can prepare that customer based on what you now know the report is about. You can prepare them that they're going to be asked about ease of installation or ROI or whatever questions you see the analyst firm is going to try to get to the bottom of in those customer references. It's almost like a net promoter score kind of a situation is, understand how happy the customer is. What challenges have they had? Have you resolved those challenges? That's all part of filtering out the customers that you offer to the analyst firm to talk to. But yeah, I think the way you prep them is based on your knowledge of what the research report is and what the analyst firm considers important. We know that in a lot of the big reports, it's about the broadness of your vision and your strategy or your ability to execute. So maybe talk to your customer and say, do they feel like they understand your vision and your product strategy and your roadmap? And if they don't understand it, they're not going to be able to articulate it back to the analyst. So I think I would approach it that way.
Those are really good tips. And yeah, just to add to that, maybe add a little bit of evidence. If you have any proof points, Mr. Customer or Ms. Customer, if you have anything you'd like to share around what your pain was before the solution, now after the solution's been implemented, deployed, what are some of the particular metrics you're actually observing? Analysts love that kind of data. So I think that's part of the prep. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, final closing thoughts here, Andrew. Again, a huge thank you. You brought up many, many tips here, 7 specific ones. We can go to the next slide here. I want to give everyone a chance to reach out to Andrew directly. We can go to the next slide. Here's how to reach Andrew. Their email is andrew@lochart.com. And this is his Twitter handle. And this is your LinkedIn profile page. So all of you in the audience, feel free to link out directly. After this briefing today with you, Andrew, it is a briefing, although we have a relationship. We will send this out to everybody. We'll send out the recording. And again, we encourage you to connect with Andrew. He is a fantastic asset to have in your personal network. So with that, I'll just say thank you so much, Andrew. Any final closing thoughts before we pause the recording? Just, again, the root of all this is credibility. Whether you're at a huge company like Unisys or a brand new startup, you have to build credibility if you're really going to get buyers to believe in you and to grow. And that credibility doesn't come from you saying nice things about yourself. So just reflect on that. Think about what your content strategy is and think about how you get your customers and the analysts to be the megaphone for your story. And again, just thank you so much, Sridhar, for inviting me on to today's call. It's a great privilege, Andrew, to have you on this call and the recording. So thanks so much, Andrew. You have a good rest of your day. All right. We will talk to you again very shortly, like today. Take care. Okay, everyone. Thank you, everybody, participating.